When logs are treated as convenient troubleshooting data, organizations often store them casually, rotate them inconsistently, and give broad access to anyone who might need them. That approach collapses the moment logs must serve as formal evidence, because evidence has stricter requirements than convenience. In this episode, we are going to focus on engineering log retention and integrity controls that can withstand serious scrutiny, including the kind of scrutiny you might face in court, in regulatory investigations, or during high-stakes internal reviews. The central idea is that logs are not just records of events. They can become proof of what happened, when it happened, and who did it. And proof only works if you can show the records were preserved reliably and were not altered. Retention controls determine how long logs are kept, how they are stored across time, and how you ensure the right logs are available when needed. Integrity controls determine how you prevent tampering, detect alteration, and demonstrate authenticity, even if an attacker gains privileged access to production systems. For beginners, this topic is about developing a disciplined mindset. If you want logs to function as evidence, you must design them like evidence, with clear lifecycle rules and protections that anticipate both accidents and adversaries. By the end, you should be able to explain what makes logs legally defensible, how retention decisions are made, and how integrity protections fit into a broader chain of custody. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A practical way to approach legal defensibility is to think about the kinds of questions a skeptical reviewer would ask about your logs. They might ask whether the logs are complete for the period in question, whether the timestamps are reliable, whether the identity attribution is trustworthy, and whether someone could have edited or deleted events without detection. They might also ask whether the organization followed consistent procedures for collecting and preserving logs, or whether the process was improvised after the incident occurred. These questions are not unique to court. They are the same questions auditors and incident investigators ask, but court scrutiny can be especially strict because the consequences are higher and because opposing parties may look for weaknesses. Legal defensibility, therefore, depends on technical controls and on process discipline working together. Technical controls alone are not enough if the organization cannot explain how logs were collected and preserved consistently, and process alone is not enough if the system makes tampering easy. Architects design logging programs that produce reliable evidence by making the collection pipeline predictable, by protecting logs from alteration, and by documenting retention and access rules. For beginners, the key is to see that evidence is not created at the moment you need it. It is created continuously by how you design and operate logging every day. If your everyday logging habits are sloppy, you cannot suddenly become evidence-ready during a crisis. Log retention is the foundation because evidence must still exist when you need it, and different kinds of needs require different retention periods. Some retention requirements come from laws, regulations, or contracts, while others come from practical security needs, such as detecting slow-moving attacks that unfold over months. Retention is not simply keep everything forever, because indefinite retention creates high storage costs, increased privacy exposure, and operational burdens in searching and managing the data. Retention planning, therefore, begins with identifying which log categories are essential for accountability and forensics, such as authentication events, privilege changes, administrative actions, and sensitive data access events. These high-value logs often need longer retention than high-volume, low-value operational logs. Architects commonly define tiered retention, where critical audit events are retained for longer periods with stronger protections, while less critical logs are retained for shorter periods or summarized. Another retention decision is whether to keep raw logs versus normalized or aggregated forms, because raw logs preserve original detail but require more storage and careful parsing later. For legal defensibility, retaining original raw events can be important because it reduces questions about whether data was altered during transformation. A beginner misconception is that retention is only about storage capacity, but it is actually about aligning evidence availability with risk and obligations while managing cost and privacy responsibly. Retention also depends on being able to prove completeness, meaning you can show that logs are not missing large gaps during the relevant period. Completeness is difficult because systems fail, networks drop events, and high load can cause logging back pressure. Attackers may also attempt to create gaps by disrupting log forwarding or by overwhelming systems so events are dropped. Engineers address this by designing reliable collection pipelines with buffering and by monitoring the health of log ingestion. They also track ingestion metrics such as expected event volume and compare it to received volume to detect anomalies. From an evidence perspective, it is not enough to say you store logs. You must also detect when logs are not arriving. Completeness also ties to time synchronization, because if systems have inconsistent clocks, it can look like events are missing or out of order. Another aspect is retention of metadata about the logging system itself, such as configuration changes and pipeline health events, because those records help explain any gaps and support credibility. For beginners, the key lesson is that evidence requires not only storing events, but also being able to show that the system consistently captured them. If you cannot demonstrate that, a reviewer may argue that missing events could hide wrongdoing, which weakens the evidentiary value of the log set. Integrity is the other half of evidentiary value, and integrity controls are designed to prevent, detect, and prove resistance to tampering. In a security incident, especially one involving privileged compromise, attackers may try to delete log entries, modify timestamps, or erase traces of privilege escalation. Accidental tampering can also occur through misconfigurations or manual cleanup that overwrites logs. Integrity controls, therefore, include access controls that restrict who can delete or modify logs, as well as technical measures that make modifications detectable. The architecture should treat the log repository as a protected system, with tighter controls than ordinary application storage. Separation of duties is especially important here, because if the same administrators who manage production systems can also delete the logs that record their actions, accountability collapses. Integrity also depends on immutability patterns, where logs are written in a way that cannot be altered after the fact without leaving evidence. You do not need to think of immutability as a single product feature. It is a design goal that can be achieved through write-once storage approaches, strict permissions, and append-only architectures. The beginner takeaway is that integrity is not only about whether logs are accurate at creation, it is about whether logs can be trusted later. If logs can be changed quietly, they are not dependable evidence. Cryptographic methods are often used to strengthen integrity, and the key concept is that cryptography can provide a way to detect alteration. Hashing can create a fingerprint of a log record, and digital signatures can tie that fingerprint to a trusted signing key, so changes are detectable. Chaining techniques can link records together so that removing or inserting a record breaks the chain, which helps show completeness and order. These techniques do not magically solve everything, because they depend on key protection and on correct implementation, but they can significantly raise the difficulty of undetectable tampering. For example, if an attacker edits an old log record, the fingerprint changes and the mismatch can be detected during verification. A beginner misunderstanding is to assume that if logs are encrypted, they are automatically tamper-proof, but encryption primarily protects confidentiality. Integrity requires additional design. Another misunderstanding is to assume cryptographic integrity is only needed for external legal cases, yet internal trust also benefits because it reduces disputes about whether logs were altered. Architects consider cryptographic integrity controls especially for high-value audit streams, such as privileged actions and access to sensitive data. They also design key management carefully because if signing keys are compromised, the value of signatures falls. The deeper point is that cryptographic integrity is a tool to make evidence stronger, but it must be integrated into an overall architecture that includes access control and monitoring. Chain of custody is the process concept that ties retention and integrity together, and it matters because evidence must be traceable from creation to storage to analysis. In legal contexts, chain of custody is used to show that evidence was handled in a controlled way, reducing doubts about alteration or contamination. For logs, chain of custody involves documenting how logs are collected from sources, how they are transported, where they are stored, who can access them, and how access is recorded. It also involves documenting the procedures used when logs are exported for investigation, ensuring that investigators can prove they worked from authentic copies. Architects support chain of custody by designing controlled access to the log repository, by ensuring exports are auditable, and by minimizing manual handling of raw log files. They also ensure that the logging system itself logs actions taken against it, such as configuration changes, data deletions, and access events, because those metalogs support evidence handling. A beginner misconception is that chain of custody is purely a legal formality, but it is also a practical defense against confusion during incidents. If multiple teams download, transform, and share logs without tracking, you quickly lose confidence in which copy is authoritative. A well-designed chain of custody helps everyone know which records are trusted and how to verify them. Access control and least privilege are essential integrity controls because most tampering happens through authorized paths, not through exotic hacks. If too many people can delete logs, eventually someone will delete them, whether intentionally or accidentally. If administrators can modify retention rules without review, they may unintentionally shorten retention or create gaps. Architects therefore restrict destructive actions, such as deletion and retention policy changes, to a small set of trusted roles and often require dual approval for high-risk actions. They also separate read access from administrative access, because investigators may need to read logs without having the power to alter them. Another important design choice is ensuring that production administrators cannot easily disable logging or erase records of their own actions, which is a separation of duties issue. Access control also includes protecting backups and archives, because attackers may target backups to remove evidence or may exfiltrate backups to gain sensitive information. Retention and integrity controls must therefore apply to archive copies as well as to primary storage. For beginners, it helps to see that log repositories are high-value systems, and they should be protected like any other critical system, with strict access and strong monitoring. If log access is lax, you undermine the entire accountability and forensic program. Engineering retention and integrity controls also requires planning for storage lifecycle, because logs move through phases such as hot storage for quick search, warm storage for medium-term investigation, and cold archive for long-term retention. Each phase has different performance and cost characteristics, and each phase needs integrity protections appropriate to its risk. Hot storage is frequently accessed, and therefore must be tightly controlled and monitored because it is a tempting target. Cold archives may be accessed rarely, but they must still be retrievable and verifiable when needed, which means you need a reliable indexing and retrieval process. A beginner misconception is that archiving means forgetting, but archives are only useful if you can find and validate the relevant logs later. Another issue is format and parsing, because logs stored for years may become hard to interpret if schemas change and if documentation is missing. Architects address this by defining stable event schemas, storing relevant metadata, and maintaining documentation that describes how to interpret the logs. They also plan for migrations, because storage systems change over time, and evidence must remain intact during migrations. Migration can create integrity risks if logs are transformed without verification. A well-designed architecture includes verification steps that confirm archived logs remain unaltered across moves. The main idea for beginners is that retention is a long-term engineering commitment, not a one-time storage choice. Privacy and confidentiality concerns also intersect with retention and integrity, because logs can contain sensitive information about users, systems, and sometimes data access patterns that reveal private details. Retaining logs longer increases the window in which log data could be exposed in a breach, and integrity controls do not automatically address confidentiality. Architects therefore design log content carefully to avoid storing sensitive data values unnecessarily and to focus on metadata needed for auditing and forensics. They also protect log access and consider encryption at rest for confidentiality, while ensuring encryption does not interfere with integrity verification and retrieval. Another privacy-related aspect is data minimization and purpose limitation, meaning you should retain logs for legitimate reasons and avoid retaining personal data longer than necessary. This is especially important in environments subject to privacy regulations and internal policies. A beginner mistake is to treat logs as harmless because they are just technical, but logs can reveal significant personal and organizational information. So retention decisions must balance evidence needs with privacy obligations and risk. The architectural goal is to keep logs useful and defensible without turning the log repository into a large, sensitive data lake that is hard to protect. Engineering log retention and integrity controls that hold up in court is about designing logs as enduring evidence with clear lifecycle rules and strong protections against tampering and loss. Retention must be defined based on legal obligations, threat realities, and investigative needs, using tiered strategies that keep high-value audit logs longer while managing cost and privacy exposure. Completeness must be monitored so gaps are detected and explained, because missing periods undermine evidentiary credibility. Integrity controls must prevent and detect alteration through strict access control, separation of duties, and immutability patterns, often strengthened by cryptographic methods that make tampering visible. Chain of custody must be supported through documented procedures and auditable handling of log collection, storage, and export, ensuring the organization can demonstrate how records remain trustworthy over time. Storage lifecycle design must ensure archives remain retrievable and interpretable years later, with verification during migrations and clear metadata. Privacy and confidentiality must be considered so logs remain defensible without unnecessarily retaining sensitive personal data. When you can explain how retention, integrity, access control, and chain of custody work together to produce evidence that is credible under scrutiny, you are thinking like an ISSAP architect. The deeper lesson is that logs are only as valuable as the trust you can establish in them, and trust is built through deliberate engineering and disciplined process long before any courtroom questions are asked.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.